Let's talk about the Tired Waptus Creek Trail. Got up early in the morning, a long drive across Snoqualmie Pass down to Roslyn, exit at the Salmon-Lasac-Roslyn exit, heading up the highway along Cle Elum Lake, turning just about a mile before the end of pavement onto the Cooper Lake Road, following that road along until it turns down and goes around Cooper Lake, turns to gravel just before the lake, and follow the signs another mile or so, gets you to the trailhead. The normal trail that most people are on is heading up to Pete Lake. Very crowded on weekends, lots of campers, people going beyond that to the Pacific Crest Trail, going on up to Spectacle Lake. My plan is to do a loop, and this is a loop I've done a number of times in the past. I did one early on in my web page history where I did the trip with some friends, got back, and at the end of my trip report I stated, I can't believe I let 11 years go by since my last time around here. I won't make that mistake again. That was 11 years ago, by the way, and it has been 11 years since my last trip and 11 years since the trip before that. Great trip. I'll say the same thing again. I should certainly be back there way before 11 years go by. What's neat about this trip is you start with the walk along the Cooper River. Quickly it gets out of sight. Heading uphill, you head on up to the top of Pololli Ridge, the old lookout site where there are gorgeous views up there. Then the trail drops downhill, reaching Waptus Pass, where you have a junction there. Trail right goes down to Waptus Lake and on. Left-hand turn takes you on a long meadow up and down, and finally beginning a longer drop down to Pete Lake, and then a final 4+ miles out along a nearly flat trail back to the trailhead. All in all, about a 14-mile loop, 2,900 feet of elevation gain total, including ups and downs. This is trail, as I said, the last 4+ miles, very busy as you're coming out, people heading to Pete Lake and beyond. The first 9+ miles of the trip, I saw nobody. And that's not unusual. Just are not a lot of people who go up Tired Creek, and those who do turn around at the lookout. Very few head on down to Waptus Pass and on. So it's a lot of solitude on this trip. And one of the great things about it this time of year, lots of wildflowers, tons of wildflowers heading up to the top of Pololli Ridge. Now, on the trip, we'll start taking a look at some photos. As you can see here, I'm heading out, and right at the very beginning, the trail goes through just a field of vanilla leaf, both sides of the trail. Real pretty. They were on full bloom right now. There were some trillium along the way, and they were all finished. Higher up, trillium were blooming. Down here, pretty much all finished. Crossed Tired Creek, which there actually had been a lot of rain the last few days, and the water was running pretty good in the creeks, but not a lot, and it was an easy rock hop. At 1.3 miles, I came to the junction, not really well marked. If you're looking for it, not hard to find. Right-hand turn, and through an old burn. On my earlier trips way back 20 years ago, this was an old clear-cut burn, and there frankly just were great views and not a lot of trees, a lot of brush. That's changing. Trees coming back. They've grown a lot in 20 years. Nice forested walk, although there is one good spot with views up to the peaks of the Cascade Crest. Still lots of snow up there. Get up to the road shortly, and there are no signs. There's a great sign telling you to head on downhill where the trail goes from where I've just come from, but there's no sign for right or left-hand turn. So have a map. If you don't, remember, you turn right when you hit the old road. That road was drivable when I first hiked it, and in fact you could drive to near the end of the road, and there was a downhill trail that intersects the Pete Lake Trail not far from Pete Lake, making a much shorter trip. That trail's still there, and it's well marked on the way back from Pete Lake, but now it's a fairly long road walk to get to the end of that road. So I took my right-hand turn, heading slightly downhill, and in a short order came to what was a bridge over Tired Creek. A bridge has been removed, the old auto bridge. Now you've got a pretty good climb down and back up the other side to continue on the road. I turned uphill on the Tired Creek Trail, which my recollection was a lot of this was in the open. That's one of the reasons I'm doing it in this direction, going counterclockwise to get all the climbing out of the way earlier in the morning before the heat of the day. That actually wasn't really the case, as most of the trip up to the lookout side is in forest and was not all that warm. It was nice, but again, there was plenty of trees to minimize the heat. This was burned not too many years ago, although that too has grown back very nicely. Wildflowers along the way, I saw a fair amount of lupin, paintbrush, amongst others. Farther up there was more creeks, more water running, and I saw a lot of marsh marigolds, a flower that I've seen a great deal of this spring. Just about every trip I seem to see marsh marigolds. As I was hiking higher, I came to more open rock gardens. Lots of eastern Washington type wildflowers, desert wildflowers up there as well. Heading higher into the meadows. One point. Before you get up that high, there is a point in the forest where you come to a switchback, and from there, very nice views out. You can see the Three Queens across the way, Chickaman Peak, Lima Peak, on around. Really nice views. Still a fair amount of snow up on the peaks, and real pretty this time of year. Again, heading back up the trail, you come to meadows, and this is within the last half mile or so before the ridgetop. The meadows were great this time of year. Lots of glacier lilies as the snow has just gone away. I only had to cross a couple of patches of snow, really not much at all, and that made it real easy hiking. Again, many more marsh marigolds. Also found some fields of shooting stars, beautiful purple flower. Lots of buttercups, other yellow flowers. So nice color in the meadows. I stopped and spent a fair bit of time just enjoying that. Bugs haven't really come out yet. They were very minimal, which made, again, the sitting there in the meadows, the wet meadows, not such a big problem this early. After that, I headed on up and reached the junction on the ridgetop. Right-hand turn, fairly short, a third of a mile or so, short order. You reach the old Lookout Side high point. My first visit 25 some years ago, at that point there were great views. There were some trees growing back, but nearly a 360 beautiful view. View is still really good, although trees are coming back and in individual spots the view is blocked out. But with a little moving around, you can see in between and get good views of pretty much the whole Cascade Crest, as well as Mount Rainier to the south. But again, from Three Queens to Alta, right up through the crest peaks of Dutch Miller Gap with Summit Chief on one side, Bear's Breast on the other. Mount Hinman and Mount Daniel with lots of snow, very pretty this time of year. As you go farther on, you can see the Cradle, a peak I climbed quite some years ago. Real rocky, crappy climb, but it was fun to get up there. And then Mount Stewart, which is visible just about everywhere. And a very interesting view, a very triangular view from this angle. The Chandaway Peaks are visible, but hard to distinguish one from another from this distance. So I spent a good, about 45 minutes up on the summit. Had a little bit to eat. Again, just enjoyed all the great views. No people, nobody up there. Finally headed on down. The trail is pretty much all downhill to Waptus Pass. There had been, since my last visit, quite a number of trees down that had been cut away. This is not a real heavily used trail, and I was glad to see that so much work had been done in clearing the trail. This year it looks like there were more trees down, probably just last year. There are a good dozen or more trees to be cut out between heading down from Pololly Ridge down to Waptus Pass and on around to Peat Lake. None of them proved to be a great problem for a hiker. Several of them would be troublesome for horses. They were all pretty good sized. I was able to pull two smaller ones off of the trail entirely, but of the ones left, you're going to need a good sized saw to take those out. Down at Waptus Pass, I found more meadows, a good sized creek, a nice campsite there by the creek. No signs anyone has been there this week. Headed on, there are a number of little bridges through the wet meadows, which were fairly new 11 years ago. It still looked to be in really good shape. I had forgotten that from Waptus Pass there are actually quite a few small ups and downs and a fair bit of elevation gain as you cross all of the meadows. First you come to a side trail heading on up to the Pacific Crest Trail. Well signed, easy to see. Farther on, there are two creek crossings. One is actually the Cooper River. One is a good-sized creek, and they're fairly close together. After the first one, there's a nice waterfall. It's a really nice place to just sat down and enjoyed. You could it's fairly flat. You could even just sit out in the pool of water below the waterfall. This day I was able to rock hop across without too much difficulty. That made it fairly easy. After the first crossing, there is a trail up to Escondido Lake, and that trail is well signed. Right before that, not so well signed. I crossed the creek, and there were two trails heading off. I took the larger of the two, just went to a campsite, came back, took the smaller, which is actually the main trail, and real quickly came to the junction for Escondido Lake. Just after that is the crossing, the second of the creek crossings. And I learned on this trip something I didn't know. The water coming out of Pea Lake, in fact, is not Cooper River, although it is shortly thereafter. It's just more of Lima Creek, and it's not until this creek that I crossed up high meets that Lima Creek that the combination is the Cooper River. So from there it's downhill. Because I'd forgotten a little bit, this is a kind of a crappy section of trail. As you head downhill, it gets very rocky. In sections, it's just small bouldery rocks. With light running boots, it was kind of a pain. Not difficult, not particularly steep at any point, just very rocky. There is a nice waterfall 2/3 of the way down off the trail in a little gorge. Very, very nice. And finally, after getting back into some very warm sun, getting a few more views out to those peaks, drop back into forest and reach the low flatlands down below in the valley, and a few minutes later I was popped out at Pete Lake. Pete Lake, I saw the first people of the day. 5.5 hours of hiking, 9+ miles. First folks I saw, including the parking lot, the entire day. Spent a good half hour at Pete Lake. Had to look around a bit to find a place on the shore that didn't have people. There were quite a number of folks camping there. But did find a nice spot by the outlet with beautiful views up the lake. I have some, again, photos of the view from there. Also saw the first bleeding heart of the day. Nowhere else on the trail, but they were right there by the side of the lake. A nice little patch of those. After my half hour, it was time to finish up and head on back. First off, leaving the lake, there's nice sections along Cooper River. It actually runs a little fast in spots there as it drops. Very quickly, it becomes very flat. It's almost more of a lake than a river at that point. And the trail, unfortunately, moves away from the river. You see it very little on the way back. What you do see is a lot of trees and a number of little creek crossings, some of which were dry, all of which were easy to get across. But at each one of those, you drop down 20 feet, you climb back up 20 or 30 feet on the other side, times many. So there's actually a fair bit of elevation gain, even though it's downhill and even though the difference between Pete Lake and the trailhead is very minimal. Heading on out, I saw a number of people coming in as you'd expect on an afternoon. Groups of 2, 3, 4, probably at least 6 or 7 different groups coming in. The trail out, although there are the ups and downs, is very fast, and in fact averaged over 3 miles an hour, well over 3 miles an hour on those last 4+ miles, and finally popped back out at the trailhead to find the lot now mostly full. But not entirely full. There were still parking spaces there. And again, this is a popular place. I was a little surprised to see on a weekend with good weather that it didn't fill up. So much the better. For the day, I had fantastic solitude. Views from up at the lookout side are spectacular. The meadow is really nice with all the wildflowers in the spring. They're short-lived and will probably be gone in 2 or 3 weeks, but for now, just spectacular. Trees to cross, down trees, but none of them a great problem around the loop. Waptus Pass, again, no people, nobody to be seen, no signs of people. And finally down to Pea Lake, a nice big lake with gorgeous views. All those peaks you saw along the route, right close behind you now are the Cascade Crest Peaks. And then that long slog out back to the trailhead, but again, not difficult as the trail is fairly smooth and wide and for the most part, fairly flat. It's a great trip. I had a fantastic time. Never have camped on this. I've always done it as a loop. I've always done it counterclockwise to get the elevation out of the way first. I suppose doing it the other way might liven it up a little bit, make it a little bit different. Nice trip, highly recommend it, and one I'll be back to do in the future. On my website is the trip report, including all of the photos, if you want to take some time to look those over. Each of the photos on my website has a sentence or two explaining what you're seeing, what's in the photo. The overall site now is over 640 trip reports and coming up close to 20,000 photos. I should be there in about 2 months. It's a big site. There's a lot to see there. There's a link to it below at YouTube with this movie. By all means, go take a look at all the other reports. As time goes on, I'll try and put up more trip reports. This is purely a test. I wasn't actually pointing at any of the photos this time that I have put up, but I will put them up so I'll have something to work through, then be able to redo this as a final go. But for now, this is the longest one I've done. It's a full trip report with everything but the photos. Right now I'm just looking at a green screen, but once I get those in, it should look pretty good. That's all for now.